Hello sewing friends, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns, and today I'd like to introduce you to my new sewing pattern, which is the Clamshell Sling. Wear it as a sling bag, waist pack or crossbody. And as with all my patterns, it's domestic machine friendly and a really fun sew. It's a sling bag that can be worn on the front or on the back of the body, or with a quick cinch of the strap. It's a waist pack, call it what you will, a bum bag, fanny pack, hip bag, and it's a crossbody too. Yes, it even comes with an option for a removable strap so you can wear it lower on the hip too. And it comes with a cute little removable strap pouch. I'm really proud of this one. It's a little miracle of fabric engineering. This beautiful, sleek, curved shape is achieved with cleverly engineered pattern pieces, which took me ages, and they're in sections so that you can make this gorgeous, plumptious, rounded shape with ease. It's the happiest clamshell shape. I just couldn't call it anything else, could I? With these super shaped and curved panels to the front and a flat back to sit comfortably against the body. I'm classing this as an intermediate pattern, but it isn't difficult to construct. If you've made a few bags before and are happy to sew a curve, it'll be a breeze. And as with all my patterns, it's domestic machine friendly too. The pattern is instant download and comes with full written instructions and detailed colour photos. Full-size computer drafted pattern pieces that print onto A4 or US letter size paper, and a sew-along video to take you step by step through making this lovely sling bag. So let's talk features. There's an optional zip overlay pocket to the front to keep small items such as ID cards and earbuds handy, or speed up the make and leave the front pocket off. This flat front panel means it looks just as good with a badge or personalisation to the front, or use it as a foil for a feature print or embroidery. You could also choose to use this same zip overlay pocket inside the bag if you want an extra zip pocket. It fits perfectly there too. The bag has a large zip opening with a deceivingly roomy interior compartment for your phone, keys, glasses, wallet, even a book or travel documents. If you're using it for dog walking, then the lead will fit nicely in there too. It's fully lined and has a credit card pocket to the back lining to hold numerous cards. On the reverse of the bag is a large handy slip pocket, and this disguises the strap attachment method, but you get a cheeky feature flash of the strap underneath. There are two strap options included: a fixed webbing strap with side release buckle for easy transfer and adjustment from sling bag to hip bag, or choose a removable fabric strap for a sophisticated sling or crossbody style. I've also included a free raw edge bonus pattern for this cute little strap pouch to keep cards and notes handy, which you can slide on or off the strap or use as a matching wallet inside the bag. Use it for days out, travel, outdoor pursuits, dog walking, or bling it up for a classy shopping weekend or a night out. The approximate size is 24 by 15 centimetres, and that's 9.5 by 6 inches. But all the pattern pieces are included so that you can also print at a larger or a smaller scale to make the clamshell sling bigger or smaller if you choose to. It comes together really quickly. It takes only a small amount of fabric, and if you choose the recommended fabrics, virtually no interfacing either. None of the bags you see here have any interfacing in whatsoever. It's ideal for firm fabrics such as cork, vinyl, wax canvas, firm waterproof canvas. Even these pre-quilted nylon lining fabrics make a squishy, high fashion version. But of course it's still domestic machine friendly. All my testers found this really easy to achieve.
And talking of testers, just look at all these amazing clamshell slings. There was no stopping them. This pattern was one of their favourites ever. They embroidered and blinged their way to happiness. The Clamshell Sling sewing pattern is available now as an instant download PDF on my website or on Etsy, or by clicking on the links below this video. For more Spencer Ogg patterns, why not pop over to www.spencerogg.com, sign up to my newsletter to be first in the know with any new patterns, tutorials and general Spencer Ogg news. I always love seeing your Spencer Ogg creations, so please do join our welcoming and helpful Facebook group to show off your makes, ask your questions and find bag making advice.
And of course, here on YouTube you'll also find lots of my free patterns and tutorials to keep you inspired. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all my testers. You know I can't do it without you. So if you like the look of the clamshell sling bag, what are you waiting for? Grab the pattern and let's go sew. Thank you for purchasing this Spencer Ogg sewing pattern. Please read through the pattern document before you begin, as there are a number of different options to choose from. The seam allowance throughout is 6mm or 1/4 inch unless otherwise stated. It is different to my normal patterns. Normally I do 1cm or 3/8 inch, but this one is 6mm or 1/4 inch, but I will remind you all the way through. So firstly, let's very briefly go through what you need for this pattern, but you'll find all the details along with the required amounts in the written document. So first and foremost is your outer fabric. So we want a firm fabric for this, something with a good meaty handle. So I'm suggesting cork, vinyl, and you can use some really nice firm vinyls for this, waterproof canvas and Cordura, heavyweight waterproof canvas, waxed canvas and oilskin. If you use these types of fabrics, you do not need any interfacing on them. I don't advise using quilt cottons for this project. If you do want to use it, you can, but you need to add a layer of Decaville light to that before you start. So as I say, if you use the recommended fabrics, you don't need interfacing, only if you're using a quilt cotton for the outer. So in terms of the lining, any lightweight fabric such as lightweight waterproof canvas, nylon lining fabrics or quilt weight cottons. Interfacing for the lining, if you're using waterproof canvas and nylon lining fabrics, you don't need anything. If you are using quilt cottons, then just add a layer of medium weight fusible interfacing such as Vilene F220, G700, Pellon SF101 or any similar light to medium weight. You'll need 2 zips for this project, number 5 nylon coil zips. We do want nylon zips because we're going to cut through them. It's not suitable for metal zips. We want an 8-inch and a 16-inch zip, and I'm using continuous zip and just cutting it to size. If adding the front pocket with the overlay strip, you will need a small piece of non-frame fabric such as cork or vinyl or leather. We're using webbing strap, so I'm suggesting at 1 1/4 inch or 1 1/2 inch. It can be nylon, it can be cotton, anything you can get hold of or that you like. There's some really nice jazzy ones out there at the moment. As a strap closure, we're going to need a side release buckle. So again, choose a side release buckle in the size that fits your own webbing. So
again, I'm suggesting 1 1/4 or 1.5 inch in width. You can find lots of different colours and designs in these now, and some really exciting ones out there. Try and choose one that has a tri-glide with it. But if it doesn't, don't worry, you can leave one end of your strap just loose, or you can use a metal tri-glide from your stash. We are using a small piece of bias binding at the end. So you'll need a 3/4 inch bias binding, single fold or double fold. If you're not adding the pocket on the front, you might choose to add a metal badge or an embroidery or a patch, anything to just jazz it up. But it does look good without the front pocket too. There's also an alternative strap at the end of the document, which is a removable strap, and if you want to use that one, then you're going to need some swivel clasps and D-rings in 1 inch. We're going to use a little bit of double-sided tape, and if you make the small pouch for the strap at the end, then you'll need 1 plastic popper too, or plastic snap. So if you're ready, let's start making the clamshell sling. So just a few tips for this pattern before we start. In terms of the fabric, we've already discussed fabrics, but I'm using an embossed vinyl here today. So that's a nice firm vinyl. You want something with a nice weight and firmness to it. And I'm also using a waterproof lining fabric. It's a nylon lining fabric. This one has a waterproof coating on the back, which makes it a little bit firmer, but certainly don't need any interfacings with something like that. Because it's hard to distinguish between back and front on the video, I've just put some cross hatches on the back there so you can see which is back and front, but we'll talk about it as we go. So tips for this pattern. One of the main things is that the seam allowance on this is different to most of my other patterns you'll have made before. So normally I would always use a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but on this one it's a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so it is smaller than my other patterns, and I'll discuss it all the way through the video, don't worry, and it's in the notes all the way through. So please just bear in mind that it is a smaller seam allowance of 6mm or 1/4 of an inch throughout, unless otherwise stated. The reason for that is because this bag's got such a curved nature. We'd really be doing a wider seam allowance to cut it down, and actually on the front curved sections it's very difficult to do it with a wider seam allowance. You're much better off doing a narrower seam allowance on a nice shapely curve. And I've also mentioned in the instructions that please do mark a T or top on the top of each of the curved pattern pieces, because it is really easy to get them mixed up. They do look very similar, but you've got markings on the top of some of them, and you want to know the top and bottom. Also make sure all your notches are marked, so you can either mark them with chalk or a waterproof pen or a disappearing pen, not a waterproof pen, because you want to make sure you can see those easily when you're making up. Cut as accurately as you possibly can. It does make a really big difference to something which is such a small curved project. Some of these are really quite small pieces. Again, mark the T on the top, but you can see it is quite important to get that curve right, to be able to get your bag curve right in the end. And just to point out that on some of these shaped pieces, particularly the C and D piece, I think it is, yeah, C and D, that small bottom edge, slightly wider than the front, you'll see it's marked with a top on the narrower edge, but at the bottom where it joins onto our other curve, those are slightly curved themselves. They're not a straight edge, so don't just whiz across with your rotary cutter. They're actually slightly curved, and that gives us more of a bowed effect when we put the bag together. Press all your fabrics before you cut to avoid any shrinkage later on. You're better off shrinking your fabric before you cut it out, or your pieces aren't going to match. Don't put any fleece or foam inside this, it's just too bulky. If you use the suggested fabrics, then you don't need any interfacings anyway. If you want to use quilt cottons and other cotton fabrics, you do need to add a layer of something to give it the firmness, and I am suggesting you use Decaville Light there, because Decaville Light gives it that nice firm handle without adding any bulk whatsoever. You don't want to add the bulk of foam or fleece. I've included a bonus pattern for the mini pouch, which attaches to your strap. That is a raw edge project. It's not like this, it's just an additional bonus. So that is only suitable for fabrics that do not fray, such as vinyl, leather and cork. So as usual, backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam and trim loose threads as you go to keep your project tidy. Draw your seam lines on before you stitch if it's easier. Remember it's 1/4 inch and sometimes it is easier to draw them on, especially when we're snipping into curves later on. You don't want to snip too far. Bear that in mind when you're cutting your notches as well, that your seam allowances are just 1/4 inch or 6mm. You don't want to make your notches any deeper than that when you cut to snip or snip to show where they're going to be. You can just mark those with a pen if you prefer. Leave your paper pattern pieces pinned or clipped to your cut pieces, or use the handy labels just to stick those on, just so you can identify your pieces as you go along. Press at every stage for a smart finish, and of course if you're using vinyl or cork, use a pressing cloth so you don't melt anything. And save a bit of paper, just print out your paper pattern pieces. You can follow along the written instructions on screen on any device. You don't need to print off all the pages. So print off your pattern pieces using Adobe Reader at 100%. If you need help with printing patterns at correct size, then I've got a video to help you with that, and I'll link it in below, and if I remember I'll put a link in above here somewhere too. So cut out and let's make a start. So the first operation is to make the outer front of the bag, and I'm going to make the front zip pocket with overlay. Now this pocket is completely optional. The bag looks great with or without it, so you don't need to add it. It looks just as good with a feature badge, a patch or even embroidery on the front. So if you are omitting the front pocket, you can skip directly to the next section and constructing the profile curve for the front. So if you're adding it, let's look at our front zip pocket with overlay. So take your zip overlay piece K and just cut it to size. You'll see that the corners can be clipped off, so you can either make it as a straight oblong or you can just clip off the corners. So cut out the size you want and then cut it from your non-fraying fabric, and do cut out that centre section as well, of course. So lay your outer front centre panel, piece A, face up and centre the zip overlay, piece K, centrally on top, right side uppermost, 2 centimeters or 3/4 inch from the long top straight edge. Now I've already put it in place just to save time, and I've attached that with a little bit of double-sided tape. It really makes things easier. And now I'm going to stitch around the outside of it. I'm not stitching on the inside. I'm just stitching on the outside edge, 3mm or 1/8 inch from the edge. So on my machine today, because I am using embossed vinyl, which is quite hefty, I am using a Microtex needle, and the size is 90 or 14, so it's quite a strong one, shall we say. But again, the needle size does depend on the fabric you're using. It's not dependent on the bag itself. It depends on your fabric. So lighter fabrics, smaller needles or lighter needles. And if you're using things that might make holes and leave holes in the fabric, then use a thin, strong needle like a Microtex needle. So let's stitch that around the edge. I have put a blind hemming foot on my machine as usual, so I keep a constant distance from the edge, and it makes it nice and simple for me. There we go. So what I did forget to mention is I increased the length of my stitches. That is a stitch length of 3 I'm using on my machine. A longer length of stitch looks better when you're top stitching. So now I want to cut out this centre piece, so I'll be able to see my zip from behind. So the easiest way to do that is, don't use a ballpoint pen like me, I'm using it so you can see it. So I'm going to mark on there. So use chalk or a disappearing pen. So I'm going to mark that gap on there. So don't worry, you're cutting this whole thing away, so you're not going to see it afterwards. Grab my scissors. So I'm going to cut out the rectangle of that outer fabric. So I'm not cutting into the top overlay piece at all. I'm going to cut out that piece underneath of the outer fabric. And I'm cutting that rectangle out about 2mm or 1/16 of an inch outside that marked line. So I'm just going to go inside there because I don't want to see any of that outer fabric peeking through underneath the zip overlay. Take a long stab at it first. I usually just cut it through the centre first, and then I'll make a go. You can lift up one side and just see where your mark is and just cut inside it. To be honest, it doesn't matter if you cut right up to the stitch line, so you can cut from either side. As long as you are within that stitch line that you made, you'll be okay. But if you can get it just inside like that, then your next line of top stitch will catch it. It makes it a little bit more secure, but don't worry if you go too much. That's not a problem. So either way, you find it easier from one side or the other. You might find it easier with small scissors than great big ones like me. Certainly to get into the corners. I should have brought some small scissors over, I must admit. So you can see I'm just cutting outside that line, so it's just falling on the other side so that you can't see it. So if I flip that over, you can see there's no outer fabric showing through that slot. So I'll go back, I'll just tidy that up a little bit so it's straight. Yeah. It's a little bit faffy, but it doesn't take long. Probably would be easy with smaller scissors. So I'm now going to lay that to one side for a moment. I'm going to take my outer front pocket lining pieces, piece J, and I just want one of those for the moment. As I say, you can see this is hard to tell back to front or back and front, so I've just made some cross hatches in chalk on the back just so you can see it easier. So that's one piece J. And I'm going to grab my zip. So this is the shorter of my two zips I'm going to use for this, and it's 20 centimetres or 8 inches. And I'm going to centre it across one long edge with right side uppermost. I know it seems strange. And zip puller to the right when closed. I'm going to clip that in place. I have zigzag stitched across my ends just to make sure I don't lose my zip puller. Not too bad on this zip actually. Make sure it's nice and straight. That's really bad clipping, isn't it? I'll be in trouble for that. And using them the wrong way up. So just to reiterate, the pocket piece is the right way up and the zip is the right way up. I know it sounds strange, but we're doing it differently. That's going to be overlaid over the top so you can see why. So I'm going to stitch across there with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from edge to edge. So I'll change for a zipper foot. And let's stitch that. Goes, that's attached. I've back stitched just where it went onto the fabric just to hold that securely. Trim up, trim all the way through. You don't want to be trying to find ends of threads at the end because they're really difficult to get at after you've finished your project. And then I'm going to take that TIIME board and press the zip away from the pocket piece. So you'll then see the right side of the pocket and the wrong side of the zip. There we are, I've pressed my zip away. So this is the right side of the pocket lining piece with the wrong side of the zip visible, or if you flip it over, you see in the back of the fabric and the right side of the zip, and my seam allowance is pressed away from the zip. So lay it so you can see the free edge of your zip tape, and we want the right side of the fabric uppermost and you zip the wrong side uppermost. And then I'll take my second outer front pocket lining piece J, and I'm going to lay that right side down on top with the lining pieces right side together. I'm going to line up the outer edges and clip it in place along the raw edge of that zip. So the right sides of my fabric are together, lining up the edges of the pocket pieces, but lining up the top edge of the fabric with the free edge of the zip. Flip that over so I can make sure it's in the right place. Oh, I'll be in trouble for these clips all over the place. So there we go. There's my zip underneath, and you can see our zip will be attached and it'll look the wrong way around, but that's fine. So I'm going to stitch across there again with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Right, I'm going to stitch it from the zip side so I can see it better. Totally optional. Trim that up again. So now we're ready to attach that to our outer front centre panel. Lay it with the unit with the zip with the right side up. You can see that back pocket panel is actually shorter at the moment. So lay it with the zip right side up. So you've got your two pocket pieces right sides together. That's shorter underneath, that's fine. And we want the zip on the top, and your zip puller should be on the left now when closed. If it's not, you can just swap it over easily enough. But make sure that's flat and you've got the longer piece on the front. And then I'm going to take my outer front centre panel again. Now flip that over to the wrong side and just add a strip of double-sided tape above and below your zip slot opening. Yes, I've done it already because you know how long it takes to pick the ends if you're not prepared. You don't want to see me do that for half an hour. This sticky tape I've got at the moment is a nightmare for it. I'm there for ages trying to pick the ends off. So I'm going to remove the backing. Look how easy that is, not in real life. So I'm going to flip that back over, just open that zip a third of the way now. Flip this back over and I'm going to lower it onto the zip. So have your zip puller just in the centre there. I'm going to lower this on so it's central, so just make sure you're about the centre mark. And I'm going to lower it on so my zip is central in the middle. Try that again. And squish my tape down, just have a check underneath, make sure you're about central. Doesn't matter if it's slightly off, you're never going to see it. And there we are, so we're ready to stitch that now. As I say, make sure that zip is open and you can see the puller in the centre here somewhere, you don't want it off at the sides. So flip the unit over and lift the upper pocket lining to reveal the wrong side of the zip. So I'm just going to clip that up out of the way at the moment because we just want to stitch through the one layer at the moment. Clip it up there. So you can see the back of your zip. Your pocket pieces are open. Flip it back. Make sure you're nice and straight. And then I'm going to sew one line of stitching only across the zip overlay, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch under the zip opening. So I am just going to stitch a line here. So on the overlay strip, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch just onto the overlay, and that will hold the bottom edge of your pocket lining in place. We don't want to catch this top edge in at the moment. So check, bottom edge only. So you can see I have just stitched underneath, so I've stopped and started literally a stitch from the edge of the slot and gone all the way along the bottom. So you can see you've just caught in that underneath pocket piece only. Doesn't matter if you haven't caught it in, as long as your zip's in there, that's fine. So I can now take those off. So I can flip that pocket piece back down now. And now I can stitch the rest of the opening. So I'm now stitching the two sides and the top. So up the side, along the top and back down, and that's with my pocket piece lying flat. So I'm catching in both pocket pieces now. One more stitch. There we are, that's our overlay attached, our zip attached, and our pocket pieces in place. Make sure your zip's working fine. Make sure you can put your hands in there. Still open at the moment, that's fine. So zip up. So flip it to the back and just trim up those outside layers. So I'm just going to trim up to the length of the shorter pocket piece. The reason I haven't cut it shorter already is because I don't know what size zip you're going to use. So if you use a smaller zip, that's going to be in a different position. So we just want to trim it. So you can draw it on, or you can just cut it freehand like that. And don't worry too much about the shape. The corners can be square. It's literally just staying within the size of the outer and keeping out the seam allowances. So we want enough space to keep out the seam allowances around the edge. So there we go. That's done. I'm just going to clip the sides here just to make sure it doesn't move. And now I want to secure those edges. So to do that, I want to flip it over and just lift the sides out of the way and the bottom out of the way and stitch all the way around. 6mm or 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I'm just catching in the pocket pieces. I'm not going to catch in the outer, and that will seal my pocket. I don't need to leave any space for turning it through or anything. There's no gaps need to be left. So leave your zipper foot on the machine because it does give you more room to get into there. You're stitching across the zip too. So flip it back over and trim off any excess zip, just so it's in line with the pocket pieces. Use old scissors, don't use your best dressmaking scissors like I am. And that is your centre panel complete. So now we're ready to construct our profile curve for the front. So let's just put our centre front to one side for the moment. Now with this we want to be as precise as possible. The seam allowance, as I say, is really imperative you use the 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on this, because if you use a different seam allowance it's going to alter the shape of the curve and it's going to alter the size of the front. So 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance for all of this, please. So I'm going to lay the outer front panel, piece B, with right side uppermost, and I'm going to take the outer front side panel right, piece C, lay that uppermost, and outer front side panel left, D, and lay that uppermost. So you can see you've made a curve there. I hope you marked the T or top on the back, just so you can see which way they go, but the bottom edges of these C and D curves are the wider ones, and obviously it's the shorter ones to the top on the bottom curve. So lay them all right way up so you can see the wonderful curve and you're not going to get anything wrong there. So take one of your side panels, I'm taking the right one there, I'm going to flip that over and we're going to match these two seams together, or these two edges together. So flip that over and clip it in place. Now you will notice that that edge, or hopefully you'll notice, is not straight. So I mentioned that before, to make sure you cut that. It's a very, very gentle curve, but it does make a difference. I'll show you at the end, but it does make a difference to the volume of the curve. So we're going to stitch that with a 1/4 inch 6mm seam allowance, but try to follow the edge of the curve rather than just going straight across. So right sides together, let's stitch that. There we are. Put it back into your lay as such so you can see what's happening. Open it up. Press the seam allowance towards the bottom or towards the centre. So press it if you're using fabric, and I'm just going to top stitch that 3mm or 1/8 of an inch onto the centre bottom panel. Now try and follow that curve again. You'll notice, sorry, I'll bring that back. You'll notice you might have to pull it slightly as you get to the centre just to achieve that little curved bump in the middle. It is tiny, so don't worry if you end up with it straight. It's just a little added sort of extra if you can get it in there, and I'll show you afterwards. Just pull it gently as you reach the centre, just to open out that bump. But be a bit gentle, we don't want to stretch our fabrics. So you'll see I've stitched that, I've top stitched it and trimmed it. Just let me show you, you can see because of those curved edges we've just got a slight lift to that centre. It just gives us a bit more of a curve in the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to flip that with right sides together. Remember your T for top, should still be showing there. Clip it in place. Try to match everything exactly. Stitch with a 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowance. So trim, open it out, press the seam allowance towards the centre and top stitch. Just pull in slightly as you get to the centre. Trim, and we'll have a look at it again. So there we go, you can see how that curves just very, very gently. It is very subtle. Don't worry if you don't see it, it's not going to make any huge difference in your bag, but it does look nice. So that's your curved unit complete. So now we're ready to attach that to our centre front panel. So grab your centre front panel again, put it in the middle. Now we just want to clip or snip these inside edges very slightly to help it curve around when we attach it. So obviously that needs to sit here, so we're going to end up doing it upside down, but just to ease that curve we're just going to make some snips or clips in that seam allowance. So don't go more than 6mm into the seam allowance because obviously you're only stitching at 6, so keep it slightly less and snip away into these curves. I've spaced mine, I don't know, about 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch apart. You can leave the centre, it's really the curves that we want snipped. But those curves do come right up here. There we go, so we're snipped in place. So back into position. So you've got your outer front centre panel, piece A, with or without the optional front flip pocket, and that's face up. You've got your centre points marked or notched on all these items, so here and here, and centre point here and here, and I mark it on the back and the front because you do need to see those. So both are face up. Now I'm going to flip the outer front centre panel, A, right side down on top of the curved unit, matching this lower centre notch. So this centre notch is going to match this centre notch. So I'm just going to flip that over and put a clip in it. So you can see it's a nice smiley face. Is it a smiley face? Or is it upside down a miserable face? I can't tell from this side. No, it's a smiley face, isn't it? So your panels are right side facing each other. That's correct. And this is, your curve is moving away from the curve on the other side. So I'm going to flip it over again so that the outer front centre panel, piece A, is right side uppermost now. So I'm going to add a couple more Wonderclips. So just check that you are central. So make sure these seams align in the same place. Am I a fraction off? Yeah. So we're the same place on both sides. Add a couple more clips on that straight edge at the bottom. And then I'm going to draw this outer edge up, not with a pencil. I'm going to take it and pull it up to that outer edge, and I'm going to clip that in place too. So it's still the same line as is clipped down there. I'm going to put one on the top too, it just holds it nicely in place. I'm going to do the same on that side. So I'm going to take this corner and pull it up here and clip it to the edge of the front panel. So you can see what's happening. All I need to do now is clip. And when I say clip, I mean Wonderclip, not snip. The rest of the curved edge in so it all falls in line. So I want to make sure that the edge of this curve stays in line with the edge of that curve. So I'm going to use lots of clips. Add more snips into that curve if you need to. You will find that the curve moves one way and then the other, but don't worry, it all fits together. It is completely computer engineered to fit. So just be patient and clip around the edge. So make sure that the lines are falling. The edges are falling in line with each other. So lots of clips. I may have to run and get more clips. I might just manage it. There we go, squillions and squillions of clips, and we're all in place. So there we are. So it's my centre panel attached to my curve now. So I'm going to stitch all the way around there with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, make sure it's that narrower seam allowance. I'm going to hide that end of my own pickup because I end up prodding myself with it. And then I can use the stiletto end. It does help when going around the corners to hold the fabric in place. My zips get in the way, just move that. There we go, take those clips off. So I've just sewn around that seam, around the curved edge, not across the top, at 6mm or a 1/4 inch. Now open that up and have a look at your lovely curved edge. So you can give that a press, and you can add a couple of extra snips. Now you have sewn it together. We've snipped the curve of the outer edge, but we haven't snipped the curve of the centre piece. So you can just add a couple in there now. You don't have to if it's a lighter fabric, but when you've got a really heavy fabric like this, then it does help it to sit better at the end. I tend to just nick into the same places that I was already snipped before. So you see I've got a snip there. I'm just snipping through to the fabric on the back, just on the curved edges. So optionally now we can top stitch this as well. You don't have to, but it does sit nicely, and it does help the bags to sit nicely and the curve to sit nicely. So I'm going to open it out, press it if it's a fabric you can press. We are going to push the seam allowance towards the outside now, and I'm going to top stitch on the outside, 3mm or 1/8 inch onto the outer curve. And you'll have to put your hand underneath and keep pulling out that seam allowance along the way and keep turning it. So there we are, there's our curve. Pop it out, have a look how beautiful that is, and we'll just trim it up. Gorgeous, happy with that. So we can put that to one side and we can start work on our outer back. So we're ready to make a start on our outer back section. So I'm going to take my back pocket pieces. These are pieces F, and I've got one in lining and one in outer. I'm going to lay those right sides together. There's my cross hatching just to show the back of that lining fabric because it isn't obvious. So clip them with right sides together, and then I'm going to stitch all the way around, leaving a turning gap at the bottom, 1/4 inch or 6mm from the edge. The turning gap about 5 inches, 12.5 centimeters, but it really doesn't matter as long as you've got enough room there to be able to churn the fabric through. Trim that up, and I'm going to clip the corners. Check it's right on the other side before I do that, because that's my outer, isn't it? That's the one I should be paying attention to. Clip my corners. Trim the seam allowances back at the corners, because bear in mind all this fabric is going to jam into the corners, so it's important to get rid of a fair bit of that as well. Then I'm going to turn it through, and I know I've lost my little pointy tool somewhere. I need to go and find it. So turn that through. Use your fingers or a pointy tool to push out the corners. Don't shove your scissors in there. You'll end up with a hole. Done that plenty of times. Haven't we all? Right, I'll just take that to the ironing board and I'm going to press that. I'll find my pointy tool and push out the corners. I'm going to press that flat. Obviously I'll be using a pressing cloth because I'm using vinyl. I'll press it from the back, but push those seam allowances in at the turning gap so you can have a nice smooth finish when we attach it. Right, I'll head to the ironing board. So there's my pocket pressed. So where I've got the turning gap, that's going to be the bottom of the pocket, and that will be sealed when we attach it to the back. So I want to top stitch across the top edge here of the pocket, 3mm or 1/8 inch from the top. You could do 1 line of stitching, 2 lines of stitching, as many as you want. You could even do decorative stitching if you're using a plain fabric. So I shall just do that now. Trim that up. I'm going to add a woven badge on the back of my pocket. You can add anything you want or nothing. I want people to know who made it, obviously, so I'm going to put that on there because I haven't got a badge on the front, so I better put one somewhere. So that's my pocket complete. Trim up. You can put the... Whoop. And I banged my head on the way down as well. That's the problem with these round unpickers. They just keep falling off everywhere. Right, trim up. I was going to say, you can put the badge on if you put one on before you make the pocket up if you don't want the stitching on the outside, but you know it's on the inside of the bag, it holds it better. I prefer to put it on. It's more stable after the pocket's made. So that's ready. So we'll put that to one side and we will start work on our strap. Okay, let's prepare the strap. Now this bag uses a side release buckle, so it can easily be used as a bum bag, fanny pack, hip bag, whatever you want to call it, and as a cross body bag, chest bag, sling bag, so it works for everything. If you prefer to have a removable crossbody strap, see the alternative method at the end of the written instructions. So there's lots of different types of adjuster buckles. The one I'm using today has 2 slots on this side and 1 on that, but it could be the other way around. But don't worry, I'll tell you which way to do it as we go through. It might have 2 slots on both sides, but again, don't worry. As long as you've got 2 slots on one side, it'll work fine. For a more in-depth look at attaching different types of side adjuster buckles with and without a tri-glide, I have got a help video which I'll link in below, and I'll try to remember to add it up here somewhere as well. So I'm going to be using it today with a tri-glide. If you don't have a plastic tri-glide that your adjuster buckle came with, you can just reach in your stash and use one of your tri-glides, a metal one. That's no problem. Or you can leave it without. You can just have your end flapping away in the breeze, no problem. So I've cut a length 54 inches. I don't know what that is in centimetres. Is it 136 centimetres? I'll have to check that. But 54 inches of strap, it's in your instruction document. And I've sealed the ends. Because I'm using nylon on this particular one, I can seal the ends just by running a lighter across it. If you're using cotton or even polyester, I would zigzag stitch the ends, just neaten them so they're not fraying anywhere. Now I've used 54 inches. It is generally large enough for most people, but if you are making this bag for somebody a lot taller or larger, then maybe add 6 inches onto that. Now any width of webbing will work for it, though the wider the webbing is, the better it sits on the body and it holds the bag to the body. It's more sturdy. So just match your adjuster buckle size with your webbing size. So today I'm using 1 1/4 inches wide. Most of my samples I've used 1 1/2 or 1 1/4. I think that works best. So as I said, just choose your adjuster buckle to match. So I'm going to take my tri-glide and one end of my webbing, and I'm going to thread it up over the bar and through. And I'm going to stitch that. I've pulled a couple of inches through. It's just as much as you can allow without it looking too large, to give you plenty of space to stitch a box or 2 lines of stitches on there, or a bit of zigzag just to make sure that's secure. If you've got a good machine, you can turn that under. If it's a more powerful machine, you can turn that under and stitch it on like that. But if you've sort of burnt the ends or zigzagged the ends, it's perfectly fine like this. So a couple of lines of stitching, or as I said, box stitch on there to secure. I've still got my yellow thread in here. I'm going to leave it in, 1 because I'm lazy, but 2 because you'll be able to see it then as well. If you have a zipper foot on your machine, you can actually get closer into the hardware. Or you can just leave a longer tail. Makes things much simpler. Trim up. I did stitch it from the front because my stitching on my machine is neater from the front. Okay, so that's our adjuster buckle or tri-glide attached. I'm going to call that a tri-glide because this can be known as an adjuster buckle as well. So tri-glide is attached. So I'm going to take my side release buckle and I'm going to identify the side with the 2 slots, and that's the side I'm going to attach now. So it's got 2 slots both sides, don't worry, and it doesn't matter which side those slots are on. So I've got my strap with the raw edge on the top. So my tri-glide is here. I'm going to follow that strap. Keep it the same way up. It's the same way up. So this is the side that has got the raw edge on it. And I'm going to push that up through the back of the adjuster buckle. So that's the one nearest the clasp. Up through the other side, the slot at the top. And I'm going to tighten that. I'm going to bring the buckle up towards my tri-glide. So you can see what's happening here, hopefully. Lots of pictures in the illustrated document, but there's my tri-glide. So it doesn't matter which side it is, but it's the one that's got the two slots on. So you're going to have your strap with the raw edge up. I'm going to pass that through the bottom slot on the adjuster buckle, so the one nearest the centre, up, round and back through the outer one. And then you'll come back to the tri-glide, pass your strap, make sure it's not twisted anywhere, up through the top of the tri-glide and back down again through the other side, and that will enclose the raw edge of the strap inside your loop so it's not really visible. Okay, so that's your adjuster buckle, your side release adjuster buckle attached with tri-glide. As I say, have a look at the instruction document if you can't see it totally clearly, or if you've got different types of adjuster buckle, have a look at my video on different types of tri-glides and different types of side release buckles, and that's linked below. So don't worry, we don't need to do anything to the other side of the strap at the moment, we're just leaving it with the one on. We'll do that one at the end. So now we're ready to attach it to our back panel. So this is our outer back in outer fabric. You have got one in lining fabric, but this is the outer back. So this is your outer fabric, so I'm using my vinyl. Just flip it over and make sure you've got all your marks on there. Make sure you've got a T or you've written top on the top, because you've got zip positioning marks here and you've got your centre marks. So make sure those are all on there and nice and clear. So I'm going to flip it over with the top at the top. I'm going to measure down and make a mark. So I'm going to draw a line in chalk or disappearing pen, 8.5 centimetres or 3 3/8 of an inch from the top edge. So double check it, make sure it's straight. Put it on your mat to make sure everything's in line. And of course I don't have a piece of chalk here. I'll see if the disappearing pen works. Hopefully it will. Yeah, we can see that. There we go. So I'll take that away. And I'm going to lay my strap on there. So I'm going to lay my strap wrong side up on here. Now remember, this is the back, so you're going to be seeing the front of the strap, so it feels wrong, but this is, you then fasten it round yourself, so you're laying it wrong side down, so have the wrong sided buckle and the wrong side of your tri-glide facing up. And I'm going to lay it so that there's just 8 inches or 20 centimetres on the one side where we have no adjuster buckle. So let me measure that. If I've got a mat there, haven't I? I can see it. There we go. So I'm lining it up along that line. So the top edge of the webbing is along that line. I've got 8 inches over this side, and the 8 inches is on the side where there is no adjuster buckle. The side you have that completely depends on you. It doesn't matter, it's wearable whichever way. I kind of prefer to have the adjuster buckle moving towards the back of me, and I wear my bags on my right shoulder, so I'd put it to this side, but it completely depends on you, and it really does not matter which way you put it. It still works either way, but you may have a preference. So I'm going to get a little bit of double-sided tape. Should have done that first. Just move that down. It's stick that on there, and I won't be able to find the end because I never can. This one is terrible, honestly. Oh, we might have got it. Yay! There we are. Move that back so it's just set on that line. That position is important because that's where the bag folds over at the top. So you don't want it any higher or you're going to end up with your strap on the flap. There we are. So we are stuck on there. Now I'm just going to stitch a 16.5 centimetre or 6.5 inch box shape centrally through webbing and outer to secure it in place. So make sure that box is central because we don't want the stitching peeking out on either side of the pocket because the pocket's going to disguise this for us. So I'll just mark my centre, which is there. And 16.5, work that out, that's 8 either side, 8 1/4. So I've stitched a box there from one side of the webbing to the other, finishing on that line. And that'll hold it in place. So remember, check that that strap is upside down. I've done it a few times myself. Check that it's the wrong side of the strap that's facing upwards and the right side of the fabric is facing upwards. I overshot that one, it was a little bit messy. And it's always the messy ones when you're using contrast thread, isn't it? But it doesn't matter because the pocket goes over the top and you're not going to see it. So I'm going to grab my pocket. So that was my finished back pocket. I'm going to lay that on the top. So I'm going to line the top of the pocket up with the top of the webbing. And I'm going to make sure it's central. Yeah, more or less. Get that up there. So we're now going to stitch down the side, the bottom and up the other side to attach that pocket. You can do a triangle stitch in the corner just for extra security, and that'll close the bottom edge of the pocket too. You want to add a little bit of double-sided tape, it won't do any harm, but you need to add it at the bottom. Just down here, because otherwise you won't be able to open the pocket. Just make sure I am central before I press that down. I'm not sure I am. Okay, there we go. So we're lined up against the webbing, or very fractionally over the top of it. We're nice and straight. There we go. So I'll stitch down sides and bottom. I've stuck my clip onto it. That was the way. So that's my pocket attached. So what that last operation has done is it's sealed my pocket at the bottom, it's attached my pocket to the back, and it's also doubly secured those straps in place. So if you look inside, you've got a nice little feature there where you can see the strap, it just peeks through when you open it. So that is our back panel completed. So we can lay that section to one side now too. And it's time to move on to our lining. But first, it's that time.
Yes, it's tea break time, and we love a tea break in this house. We also love chocolate in this house, but there's none left anywhere because the son is home from uni. Anyway, it has to be done. Get your chocolate at the ready. There's no wine till after you've finished, of course. Why not take a little time to appreciate the beautiful curved front that you've just constructed? The extra pieces are well worth it to make such a unique bag. And hopefully you can see now why it's worth taking the extra time to cut really accurately and try and shape those pieces together as you work. It does add so much more volume to the bag. I can't tell you how much work and maths went into getting those curves just right to make something completely different. Right, tea break over. Back to work, everyone.
time to make our front lining. So our front lining has darts in, and that gives it that nice curved shape inside without having to go to all the bother of putting the curved pattern pieces in. So you've cut your piece G front lining on the fold, and you'll see that we've got dart lines on there. So flip it over to the back and mark those dart lines. So you can just put a pen through there, a piece of chalk through there to mark. Get yourself a dotted line, or just notch the bottom so you can see where it all comes together. You don't need the lines on there, but just so you can see. And I'm going to fold the darts centrally with right sides together. So I want these marks at the bottom to match up with each other, and I want the fold to be on the dot at the top. So put my glasses on to see it properly. I do find it helps to put a little notch in each of those marks at the bottom. Fold it so it lines up exactly with that dot at the top. So you turn it over, it should look the same. And now I'm going to stitch from the notch to the dot at the top, or along the line if you drew one. So you're going to tail off gradually. I didn't mention that was folding it right sides together, by the way. You were looking at the back. So we've stitched on the back. You see there's our dart. If you turn it over, it's made a nice domed shape to the fabric. So we're going to do the same with the other dart. So turn it over to the back again, fold it so our notches match up at the bottom, or our lines match up, and so that it folds through that dot at the top. A couple of clips, and I'll stitch that one too. Do try to make those quite accurate at the bottom, because if you make the dart bigger, you're going to be making the outside of that bag smaller, and we want it to match up with our front panel. So if you just try and match those notches, that'll be fine. So that's giving us our nice curved lining piece. So give that a press your darts to the outside, and then put it to one side. And then we can start work on our back lining. The lining comes together really quickly. So grab your lining slip pocket piece edge, and it's square, so don't worry about which way you're folding it. I'm going to fold it in half with the right sides together. So the fold line will be on the top of the fabric. So if you have got a print on your fabric, just make sure that the print isn't sideways. So as I say, this will be the top, fold in half, right sides together, clip it, and we are going to stitch around sides and bottom with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving a turning gap in the bottom. So again, it doesn't matter how big the turning gap is, as long as you've got space to turn that fabric through. So I'll just make sure I've come around my corners and I've got plenty of space. Trim up, and then we're going to clip the corners. And when I say clip this time, I don't mean Wonderclip, I mean trim. I know, gets confusing, doesn't it? So trim my corners. Again, remember that fabric is going to get crammed into the corners, so trim it a little way up the seam as well. Turn through. Pokey thing, and I shall take that to the ironing board and give that a nice press. And we're doing the same as we did on the back pocket, we're just turning in the seam allowance at the bottom edge to make it tidy. Push that in, put a clip on it, and I'll give that a press. So that's my pocket pressed. That's my raw edges just tucked in at the bottom. So I'm going to stitch a line of top stitching across the top edge of the pocket. Again, you can do one line of stitching, 2 lines of stitching. It's your pocket. Stitch as many lines as you want. Sometimes I like to go all the way. go. It just went a bit mad and a bit wonky. Doesn't matter. Bit of fun. You can add a woven label to it as well if you want. That is wonky, isn't it? Oh well. Right, so grab your back lining piece E. So make sure again that you've got your T or top to the top and you've got your notches marked on. So this is the top. I'm going to lay our pocket piece on, and I want that 9 centimeters or 3.5 inches from the top. 9. So make sure you're nice and straight. Make sure it's central. You can stick a pin in this one because we can get through it. That really is wonky, isn't it? Oh well. Does anybody really put the heads inside your bag and check them? Well, they do with mine actually. Just to make sure they're straight. That isn't straight. Right, go back again. Central, yes. Look how bent those pins are. What have I been doing? Put it that way. Okay, now I can stitch down sides and bottom. 3mm or 1/8 inch from the edge. There we are, pocket attached. Give it a press, get rid of some of those marks. How wonky is that? Ah well, design feature. So that's all our sections completed and we're ready to start adding the zip and putting it all together. Okay, we're on the zip section now. It'll come on really quickly now. That's the main portion of the bag done. So take your 16 inch or 40 centimeter zip and I'm going to mark the center of that. I have put a zigzag stitch on one end because I do not want to lose my puller, and it happens in this because you're sort of pushing the zip to one side, so you want to make sure it's secure. So I've put a big zigzag stitch on that side. This side it's harder to do that because they need to be separate, but I've put a couple of staples in the end just on the off chance I do pull it too far. So I've got my completed outer front here and I'm going to lay that face up. I'm going to place my zipper face down on top centrally with the zipper pulled to the left when closed. It's because you want it finishing at the same side as the zip on the front. If you feel you want it on the other side, fine, make both zips on the other side, but this is the standard method, opening left to right. Just going to place that face down on top and I'm going to match up the centre point on the top of the bag or the top of the panel with the centre point on the zip. I'm going to clip that in place. You do need to make sure that that mark on your zip is really clear because we're going to be matching that other side on the centre of the back afterwards, so make sure that's really visible. I'm just going to clip that across the top all the way now. Now it's there. You can have it fully open or fully closed because your zip puller can be off to one side. Out of the way, makes things easy. In fact, that's why we've got a long zip on this, and the longer it is, the easier it is. So don't skimp on your zip length because you'll find it becomes a bit of a mare otherwise. Just keep it nice and long, 16 inches minimum, and then if you can just trim it off at the end. The longer the better. Just say open it or close it, doesn't matter which, and stitch across. I can't open mine now because the clip's too close, and stitch all the way across with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've got my zipper foot on the machine again. Trim it up, make sure you've caught everything. It's nice and straight. Have a look. Make sure you're happy. Yep. So let's attach our lining. So this time I am going to open my zip fully, just get it out of the way. Just so you can see it better. I'll turn that through. So we've got the outer with right side up. I'm going to grab my front lining, so that's the one with the darts in, and I'm going to lay that face down on top, lining up the long straight edge with that zip edge, and I'm going to clip it in place. So it should be exactly the same length. If it isn't, why? That means your seam allowances are different, or you've shrunk the fabric afterwards. But it should be identical. So mine is a fraction less, but I did iron it later, not thinking that a nylon would shrink too much, and it obviously did, only a tiny bit, a millimetre. So we've got right sides together, we've got a zip in the middle, lift it up, make sure you can see it there. If you're happy, I'm going to flip it back to the front actually, or to the outer, and I'm going to stitch along there, straight along that seam that I already made, or 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's stitched all the way across. I'm going to turn that through now, have a look at it, make sure I'm happy, make sure my zip is zipping up nice and it's all even, and then I will take it to the ironing board and press it with the wrong sides together, and I'll press the zip away and up and everything. All my seam allowances are tucked inside. So let's press that. Nicely pressed. So I just want to top stitch along here now. So I'll open my zip fully just to make things easier. I have put my walking foot on my machine rather than my zipper foot, because although the zipper foot will get you closer to the edge, now I'm using a really heavy sort of vinyl, so it might struggle without my walking foot on. So I'll top stitch edge to edge, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch just below the zip edge. Okay, so I'm top stitch there, trim up anything that's sticking out. So lining fabric caught nicely inside. So now I'm just going to clip, Wonderclip, the edges of my fabric together. So all the way around. Match up your centre notch first. So I've got wrong sides facing now. Those darts are pressed to the outside, if you remember. And clip this nice and firmly, and we want to line up those edges perfectly, because we're going to bind this at the end, so we don't want the layers in different positions. We want to line them both up exactly. So I'll tip that up so you can see it, hopefully. Under my chin. Yeah, so I've clipped or window clipped all the way around. Check it both sides, make sure the edges are nicely lined up, and then I'm going to stitch within the seam allowance all the way around. So I'm just basting it, and it's less than the seam allowance because we want to keep that stitching out of the seam allowance. We don't want to see it at the end. So you stitch from back or front, whichever suits. Don't stitch over the zip, by the way, we're just stitching the fabric. trim. Trim anywhere. There we are. So you're really close to the edge. Both sides, and the edges are meeting up really nicely because it's going to make things so much easier when we bind that very last bit. So there's not a lot of binding in this pattern. I was trying to avoid it, but you can do it bagged out, but it just doesn't work as nicely. It doesn't sit as nicely, so I went for it. So we're now going to attach it to the back panel. So grab your outer back panel, keep this strap out of the way, just put a clip on it. So this side we actually attach in a completely different way. So grab the outer back panel, again, pocket towards the top, make sure you've got that notch marked at the top for your centre. Make sure your zip positioning marks from the pattern are really visible. Let me show you those. So this is where we need those zip positioning marks because we're going to start and finish sewing on those. So transfer those over. And unzip completely. Don't lose your end, that's why we've stitched that. So I'm now going to place the free edge of this zip tape, so that's this one, right side down on top, matching up the centre point on the zip. I can still just about see it. Let's mark that again to make sure I don't lose it. Matching up that centre point. Right, zip it up to start with, it might be easier. So right side down on top, match up that centre point of the zip with the centre back top notch. Top notch. So clip it on. And you can see at that point, you can flip it over and just check that it's lying more or less central. More or less central. No, exactly central. We want it exact. Turn it back over, unzip. And then we can carry on clipping. So move the front over to one side. We want that well out of the way with our strap. I'm just going to clip the zip, Wonderclip the zip, not snip the zip. So I'm going to Wonderclip the zip to the top. So we've got a nice shallow curve there, so you shouldn't need to snip into your zip, but you can if you want to. So just carry on clipping the zip around until you reach that zip positioning mark. Let's get that out of the way. So underneath you can see where that zip positioning mark is on your fabric. You want to stop sewing there on your zip. So your zip will carry on, but you want to stop sewing there. So just transfer that mark over onto your zip so it's more evident. Put a clip in. There. I'm going to stop there when we're sewing around. This side, let's clip it on. Again, there's my zip positioning mark, so I want that to come through and stop sewing exactly on that. So I'll just have a look where my zip falls, and it's there. So I'll put a mark on my zip as well, just for easy identification where to stop. Carry on clipping. There we are. So that's all clipped in place. So you can see my mark there where I'm going to stop or start sewing. I'll just put a different mark on, that's not clever, is it? Just move that so you can see that. Just carry on with the same seam allowance, you don't need to pull your zip off or anything, just carry on down till you get to that zip. Same on the other side, start or stop on that one and stitch all the way around with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So, zipper foot on the machine. Keep your front panel off to the side, I'm not touching that at all. That's one of the reasons we need that long zip. As I say, the longer the zip, the easier it makes this part. So here we are, I'm going to start stitching here on the mark and finish on this mark. Trim. What I didn't mention is it's worth zipping up before you stitch it on, of course, just to make sure everything lines up. Let's do it now just to double check. Keep your fingers crossed. That's fine. Okay, so we now need to add the line into that. Unzip fully again. And back panel face up, not face up, face up. You want your front panel and your webbing off to one side, or your strap. I'm going to take my back lining panel, make sure I've got the T to the top again, and lay that face down. So both pockets should be opening towards the top. So face down, face together. Using that central mark again, match that centre point on the zip. But you should be able to just place it directly on top of this one anyway. Clip in place. Make sure that zip's nicely pushed down inside. Lots of clips again. And again, we're going to stitch over the whole thing again at the 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowance, starting and finishing on our zip positioning marks. Turn it over, it's easier to see because you're going to stitch over the existing line you just sewed. Make sure you can see those starting and finishing positioning marks still, and just carry on round. I use my stiletto to make sure my zip is nicely pushed down inside. I don't want it popping up into my stitches. Okay, we're getting close. So we're going to pop that through and have a look. Make sure we're happy with the curve. What we can do, if you're using a really heavyweight fabric like this, is you can put a few snips in the outer fabric and the outside edge in the seam allowance only. Let's just check we're happy with it zipping up first though. Too many bits of strap here. Yep, that's great. So I'm happy with that. Just check all the way along. Yep. So I'm going to top stitch that. It's optional. Let's undo it again. I am going to put a couple of clips or snips in the seam allowance of the outer fabric of this because it is very heavy. So just outer fabric, you don't need to do the zip or the lining, they're no good. Back to the big berthas. It's just these curved edges on the corners. So I'll turn that back through, and I should take that to the ironing board and give it a press. So we're pressed. Take a look before you go any further, make sure everything is falling in line. So you can see how beautifully that should sit now. So let's go ahead and top stitch that top curve. That is completely optional, and I'd say if you are not a seasoned bag maker, I would just leave that because it is a little bit tricky and it doesn't make much difference to the end result. So I'll do it just to illustrate how badly I top stitch. There we go. I didn't do too bad in the end. So we're now going to do the same thing we did on the front. I'm going to attach the lining and outer together. So I'm going to clip the panels together on my back, lining and back outer, matching up the edges exactly, as close as I can. They're cut from the same piece, so shouldn't have any variations in size. Keep that strap out of the way. We don't want to include that in any stitching or any clipping. Wonderclipping, not snipping. And same as I did with the front, I'm going to baste the body all the way around. Ignore the zip, so it's just on the fabric. So we're basting lining to outer. Make sure the straps are well out of the way. We don't want to catch those in. And close to the edge, within the seam allowance, so less than 6mm or 1/4 inch. Make sure that strap's out of the way at the end. Trim, 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 trimity trim. And how exciting, we are ready to join them together now. So I'm just going to go off and find some jaunty binding. So off I went to find some jaunty binding, but all I could find was brown. The black would have looked nice, beige would have looked nice, but you wouldn't be able to see just on the demonstration. So I'm going to use this just for demonstration purposes. It'll sit fine inside. So just before we join the outers together, or the back and front together, I want to make sure that we've dealt with this zip and it's nice and secure. So let's open our zip 1/3 of the way, or a little bit of the way. Now this side is easy. I just want you to stitch from one edge of the back body to the edge of the front body. It's just literally to secure that zip in place so it's not moving and we can snip off the end. And then on the other side we want the zips together, and again stitching from one side of the body to the other just to hold them in place. We don't want those moving when we're stitching the body together afterwards, so it's to secure them really, so they're not moving around. Now I did find if you don't want to stitch directly over with a running stitch, I found that putting a zigzag stitch and moving up the zip till you got to that point also works really well, so totally up to you. So I've gone over that a couple of times just to make sure it's secure, and then I can snip it off with my old scissors, not with these scissors, but however, just so it's in line with the body. You can have a tiny bit extra for the moment, we can deal with it afterwards. So you can see why we need that to be secure now. So this side, again, make sure that those edges are together in the right place. So if you're open, it might not come together in the right place. You might be like this. So just zip it up as far as you can and make sure they're in the right place, join in the right place before clipping it. And then open up a bit and you can stitch that. Take it to the machine and stitch again, edge of body to edge of body, just to hold it in place, or zigzag, whichever you feel. Sometimes it's better to do it from the wrong side because zips are easier to stitch over that way. Not too bad, so we'll snip that off. I know, very scary that bit. So now we're ready to attach back to front. So let's flip it inside out, roll those straps to the inside, and pull the front over the back and match those centre notches at the bottom. So we just want to clip all the way around now. Let's get a few clips, so working upwards from that centre notch. Make sure your edges are perfectly aligned, because again, the more perfectly aligned they are, the easier it is to bind. So when you get to the top, that zip should be flat. So work your way around to the other side. And you can see, zip should be lying flat just at the top edge there where the top sort of comes over. So that was your back panel, but now forms your flap or lid, whatever you want to call it. So it's actually very pretty. It looks a little bit like a wide bra. But yeah, good Instagram shot that. I should take one. You'll see that later on Instagram. Okay, so now we're going to stitch all the way around. So from the top of the zip, including the zip, all the way around to the top of the zip on the other side. So 6mm, 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Make sure your straps are tucked well in, or you can pull them out, whichever. Make sure your zip's out away. Put it in the middle or something. Make sure you backstitch securely 2 or 3 times when you get to the ends of the zip on each side, because we want those held really, really securely. Exciting, are you ready to turn it through and have a look? We'll trim all this up afterwards, don't worry. Push those top corners out. Trim up any threads you've got. Zip it up. I'm going to give that a press before we have a good look at it. So there's our bag, nicely pressed. It's looking really good. I'm happy with that. You can see those lovely curves on the front. And now we're ready to add the bias binding inside. We'll just finish off that final seam. So grab a piece of bias binding, and you can use single fold or double fold. The only difference is single fold means it hasn't been folded over. Double fold just means it's been folded in half. So this was what's called a single fold bias binding. You can see the edges are folded in at both sides, and I've literally just taken it to the ironing board and pressed it in half. So I can slip the seam into the middle, or the raw edges of the seam into the middle. We close it over and stitch over the outside. So we do want to use bias tape or bias binding, because when it's cut on the bias it means it will curve better. So you can see how that curves without actually getting little rumples or creases in it. If it were cut on the straight, once you started to curve it round you'd get lots of little creases on the inside edge there when you're trying to stitch it on, which we don't want. So always use bias binding. So let's turn this baby through. So that's the final seam of my bag, ready to be finished off. Just going to tuck those straps inside for now. So we want to make sure that those seam edges, or the edges of both sides, front and back, are matching nicely together. So we don't want to trim the seam down too much, because we need that seam allowance to be able to stitch the binding onto. But if you do have a little area anywhere where your front and back aren't matching exactly, so for example here you can see I've just got the tiniest bit that's overhanging. I'm just going to trim that to match the other side, just so I've got a better purchase for my bias binding to stitch it on. I want it to match exactly, so I'll trim that down. You can see it matches exactly now if I run my fingers around it. Then just at your zip edges, make sure, turn it over to the back and make sure that those are matching, that zip is lying or finishing exactly at the same point as our seam is, or a seam allowance. So trim that down, and now it always scary, so you can see there. So I'm going to close my zip a little bit, because I'm going to need that space to be able to stitch it. A little bit on that side as well, a little bit extra. Okay, so that's messy. So grab your bias binding, take the centre point-ish, and we're just going to fold it over. I'm not going to use this in the traditional sense that you would do a quilt where you stitch one side on and then the other. I'm literally just using it for speed, so I'm just going to fold it over so my seam is enclosed, so my seam allowance is enclosed within that tape. I'm going to clip it at the bottom, and I'm just going to work my way around and clip it, bend it around the curves. You can see how nicely it curves round without any rumples because it's cut on the bias. So nice and tight. We'll flip it over and check afterwards that we've enclosed everything on the back as well. And then we'll deal with the ends. That needs a little more trim on that bit. And some thread ends, oh dear. On the other side. So I'll just turn it over and make sure I've got everything enclosed. Missed a little bit there, just make sure it's all tucked in. Pull that over a bit. So yeah, happy with that. So just, we'll deal with the ends now before we sew it. And I want to make those ends pretty. So obviously you can just cut them off, but then you're going to have a raw edge on your binding. So what I like to do is just fold it over. So cut about 1 inch above or a bit less, and just fold the top over and then back over on itself. You can trim the binding down a little bit underneath. You can see I've got a few ends there, so I might trim a little bit underneath just to get it out of the way. So I'll put a clip on that, and you can see there where I've just folded that over and then the binding back over on itself. So we'll do the same on this side. Trim it just above. Do a little snippety snip inside to get rid of some of the bulk on the extra. You don't need to do that, of course. You can see I've just taken some of the bulk out. Fold the top over and down while it's open, and then fold it back over, and then fold it back over on itself. There we are. You see that's folded to form a neat edge there too now. Okay, so all we need to do now is to stitch on the bias binding, and I want to stay within the seam allowance. So the furthest I want to go is actually on top of that stitching, but it's better if you stay outside the stitching on the seam allowance itself, so you're not going to see any of the stitches on the other side, and you don't want to sort of make your seam larger than it is. You don't want to affect that seam you've already sewn. So we're just going to stitch directly on top of it. And don't worry, you can do one line of stitching. If you haven't caught something on the back when you go to check afterwards, you can do another line of stitching. It all adds to it. It doesn't detract from the look, and it is a nice neat finish, so please don't be afraid of binding. So let's sew that up. Trim up. Check we've caught it in everywhere. We have. Looking good. You can, as I say, you can go and do a second line of stitching if you like, but that looks fine. I'm quite happy with that. Gives a nice finish to the inside. Nice and neat. So let's turn it back through. See, inside it just gives a nice neat effect when you look in. Obviously we'd use a matching lining or a contrast jazzy one, whichever you choose. So we're now ready to add the second side of our side release buckle. So I've left it clipped onto there so I didn't lose it. And with the bag right way round, we want the clasp the right way around as well. So if it is domed or you've got a front and a back, make sure it's on the upper side when your bag is the right way up. And we're literally just going to push it down through that slot and out through the other side. Pull a couple of inches through, and then we'll stitch it here with a box or 2 lines of stitching or zigzag, whichever you prefer. Again, I'm just going to use the yellow thread so you'll be able to see it on this, but do use matching thread. Don't be lazy like me. So you can, just before you sew it on, make sure it's fastening the right way. Make sure your clasps are on the, can't say it, the clasps are on the right way. So I can see that's the side that's going to show when I'm wearing it. So make sure it's the rounded side to the front if it has one. Just going to trim that thread while it's looking at me. So that's the second half of our side release buckle attached. And look, I've got a nest on there. I should have stitched it from the front, not from the back. I shall tidy that up later. So now, optionally, you can add the little zipper pull tabs. I'm not going to add it to this one, but there's full instructions to make the little puller tabs in there as well if you want to add an extra little bit of bling. But now I'm going to make the strap pouch to attach to my bag. So let's put that to one side for the moment. So let's make our strap pouch. So I'm going to take pieces O and P. So O is the body and P is the strap carrier. So I'm going to lay the strap pouch body, piece O, right side uppermost, and I'm going to draw a line across the width in chalk or disappearing pen at the bottom of this curved top edge. It is marked on the pattern as well if you want to transfer it from there, but it's literally just that top edge where the curve ends. So I'll lay it on my mat to make sure I'm drawing it straight, just so it's really visible. So turn it back over to the front, and I'm going to lay my little carrier piece on top centrally. I'm going to line up one of the long top edges with the line I've just drawn, so that'll fall onto the body. Clip that in place, and then I'm going to stitch top and bottom of that because my strap's going to pass through the side. So 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom, just top stitch to hold it in place. I'm also going to top stitch that edge there because that's the edge that's going to fold up and form the pouch itself, so I'll top stitch that edge while I'm there. So 1, 2, 3. Trim that up. Do just check the size of your clasp is going to fit through there as well. We want to be sure. I've made sure that's plenty big enough for a 1.5 inch side release buckle to pass through, so there's plenty of space there. I mean, if you're using a much narrower one or a narrower webbing, then you can also make that carrier narrower as well. Just make sure you've got room to put the buckle itself through, not just the strap. Now I want to add the first side of my popper, my plastic snap. So I'm going to use black so it ties in. I'm going to get all the parts out first because otherwise I'll end up putting 2 males or 2 females on, because that's what happens. There we go. 1 male and 1 female. So flip it to the wrong side. I'm going to fold that bottom straight edge up to meet the line I drew previously. So just to the bottom of where the curved flap stops. So I'll just clip it in place for a minute. So we want to add one side of the popper first. We don't want to put the popper on the flap because you'll find it really difficult to top stitch around it. So we'll do that afterwards, after we've top stitched and joined the body. So we just want to put this part, the lower part, on. So fold your flap over into its correct position. And I'm just going to push my awl and my bradawl through the top layer and through to the underneath layer. We're not going through onto the back. Literally, we just want to push a hole through the 2 layers. So you're positioning both parts, but not actually attaching both yet. So I'm going to put it there. About right, yeah. So I'm going to lift that so I can see underneath. So you can see my bradawl has gone through to the underneath side, but I'm not going through right to the back. But I can see that now. I've made a mark and it's there. So let's push that through before it disappears. Make sure it's clear on my top one as well. Yeah. And I'll apply the first part. So I'm going to push the cap through from the back. Flip it over and we'll put the female part on there. It doesn't matter, there's hardly any difference with these plastic snaps. That's one side attached. So flip it over to the back again, fold it up into position so you've got wrong sides together, and we're folding it up to that line again. Clip it in place. So I'm now going to stitch the sides and over the top and back down, but I'm going to do it from this side because my machine stitches better from the front. So I'm going to stitch up here, across and back down, and that'll close everything up and top stitch it nicely on the flap. Trimmity trim. And then we'll put the second half of our plastic snap on. So this time the cap goes on the right side of the fabric. I don't think I've got this quite central, you know. That's what you get for doing things upside down. Make sure it's in the right place. Yes, it is. There we are. So that's our pouch complete. That's the quickest project ever. So grab your bag again, and on the long side of the strap, because this is the side that will lie against your chest as such, or around your waist, whichever way you're wearing it, and thread it through the carrier. Try glide through. There we go. And that is our mini pouch complete too. Finished! I really hope you enjoyed making your bag along with me today and you love the bag that you've made. You definitely deserve a glass of wine now, and so do I. I'm going to hit the fridge immediately. Try it on in front of the mirror. Which way are you going to wear yours? It works as a sling bag, cross chest or cross back, as a bum bag or fanny pack, or lower as a hip bag. Even wear it as a crossbody on the hip. Just adjust your strap to fit and away you go. I've provided all the pattern pieces so you can also easily size the pattern up or down to suit your needs. And I've got a video to walk you through how to do that, which I'll link in the text below the video if you just scroll down. If you need any help with this or any other of my patterns,
or just to grab some free projects, do join my Facebook sewing group, and again I'll add the link in the text below too. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Now you've made one, why not try making another? There are so many ways to make it and wear it, and so many fabrics to try. So what are you waiting for? Go sew!